Thank you. So I'll start off by reciting firstly verse 2 of the Sad Goswami Astakam. Nana Shastra Vichara Nekanipano Sadharma Samstapako Lokanamitakarino Tribhuvane Manya Sharanya Karo Radha Krishna Padara Vindavajana Nande Namata Liko Vande Rupa Sanatana Raghujugo Sri Jiva Gopalako. I offer my respectful obeisances unto the six Goswamis, namely Sri Sanatan Goswami, Sri Rupa Goswami, Sri Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, Sri Raghunath Das Goswami, Sri Jiva Goswami, and Sri Gopala Bhatta Goswami, who are very expert in scrutinizingly studying all the revealed scriptures with the aim of establishing eternal religious principles for the benefit of all human beings. Thus, they are honored all over the three worlds, and they are worth taking shelter of because they are absorbed in the mood of the gopis and are engaged in the transcendental loving service of Radha and Krishna. Shri Sri Sad Goswami Astaka by Srinivasacharya, verse 2. Om Jnanati Mirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmalitam Jena Tasma Shri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yata Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Pradhan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namastate Tapta Kanchana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Satidevi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivashadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Namam Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschacha Deshatarine Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So we're studying Nectar of Devotion, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, written by Srila Rupa Goswami and translated as a summary study of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, the Nectar of Devotion by Srila Prabhupada. And previously we discussed, we will be studying only the first 19 chapters. The Nectar of Devotion describes the different shores of the ocean, the eastern, the western, the southern and the northern division. We are studying the eastern division, made up of 4 primary waves, laharis, as Srila Rupa Goswami calls them, and the eastern division is called the Purva Vibhaga. And it's made up of 4 main sections: Samanya Bhakti, which is a general description of Bhakti, which we've been covering, including the definitions, the characteristics, and so on. And then Bhakti is broken up into 3 parts: Sadhana Bhakti, Bhava Bhakti, Prema Bhakti. Prema Bhakti is the goal. It's pure love of God. It's the natural position of the soul. And we start off in the stage of sadhana bhakti, the stage of practice. Practice in the sense, simply practicing. The Prabhupada gives us the example of the baby. The baby has the capacity to walk inherently in itself. That capacity is there. But the baby, in the beginning, has to practice, get up, stumble, fall. And eventually, the inherent capacity to walk manifests. So in the same way, all of us, we have the inherent, inside us, pure love of God, Prema Bhakti, naturally within us. But it has to be awakened. And it gets awakened through practice. And the majority or the large part of the Nectar of Devotion is dedicated, actually just chapters 2 to chapter 16, 14 chapters of the Nectar of Devotion, is dedicated towards practice of sadhana bhakti. 2 chapters are dedicated to Bhava Bhakti, and 1 chapter is dedicated to Prema Bhakti. Because this is where it all happens, in the stage of sadhana bhakti. We are generally known as sadhakas, practicing devotees. In one sense, we cannot really call ourselves, in one sense, devotees, although inherently we are. Jivera Swarapoi Krishnera Nityadas. Eternally we are servants of Krishna. But we are practicing now. And by practicing, Prema will be awakened. First Bhava, then Prema. And then we said, we were going through the chapters. And in chapter 6, we discussed the 64 items. The 64 items that make up sadhana bhakti. That means these are the 64 items we practice. And we studied first the 10 positive injunctions. Then we read about the 10 prohibitions, the negative injunctions that brought it to 20. And then we discussed 44 other items. 5 of those items were repeated. In one sense, you can say it's 59. They're repeated because they are deemed to be the most potent, and we will discuss. So what we did is we discussed that in chapter 6, the 64 items, that all of us should in some shape or form practice during our stage of practice. And then we said, Srila Rupa Goswami is presenting the science of devotion. And when one deems anything to be a science, it has to be backed up by evidence. Otherwise, it's simply a belief. And Prabhupada always reminds us that Krishna consciousness is not a belief. It's not a belief, it's a science. So in the scientific world, the scientists always present evidence. So this is what Srila Rupa Goswami does in chapter 7. He presents the evidence for everything he states about the science of sadhana bhakti. And the Vedic science evidence is called Praman. And that evidence is taken from the Vedic literature. Like the scientific process for gathering evidence, it is hypothesis, experimentation, verification. That is a process, and we know from our own study that that process from a Vedic perspective is not much reliance is placed on it. Why? Because the very method by gathering the evidence is flawed. It's flawed, and because the method for gathering evidence is flawed, one cannot rely very much on the outcomes. And we know which are the 4 flaws. Anyone can remember? What are the 4 flaws of the normal scientific way of gathering evidence? Imperfect senses, make mistakes, the propensity to cheat, and what's the 4th one? Anyway, come back to it. I can't remember the 4th one. If you remember, remind me later on. So we started going through the evidence, and through previous discussions, we were going through the evidence. And this is, if you have your Nectar of Devotions open in front of you. How many of you, when we're reading or we're studying, you keep your Nectar of Devotion open in front of you? Just grab my Nectar of Devotion. Normally I read it from the database, but you can see in chapter number 7. All of you have copies of Nectar of Devotion?
Yes, Prabhu.
Yeah. Yes, Prabhu.
Oh, good. It's nice if you can keep it open as we go through it. And we're going through chapter number 7. And we've discussed various evidences. So we went through the evidence, and Srila Rupa Goswami has been presenting the evidence on the various shastras. And we arrived last week, I think, at accepting only what is necessary. Yeah, accepting only what is necessary. Then the next one, which is for the first 10, is number 9. So we finished the first 8. Now we've gone to number 9, observing the fast on Ekadasi. And Prabhupada writes, in the Brahma Vaivarta Purana, it is said that those who observe fasting on Ekadasi day is free from all kinds of reactions to sinful activities and advances in pious life. The basic principle is not just to fast, but to increase one's faith and love for Govinda or Krishna. The real reason for observing fasting on Ekadasi is to minimize the demands of the body and to engage our time in the service of the Lord by chanting or performing similar service. The best thing to do on fasting days is to remember the pastimes of Govinda and to hear his holy name constantly. So devotees, you probably caught what I've been doing in the past. I have been cross-referencing. Firstly, I go and read Prabhupada's Nectar of Devotion, the English translation, the summary study, and then I cross-reference it to the actual Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu with the Sanskrit verses, and wherever possible, the commentaries of our acharyas, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and Srila Jiva Goswami. So what I have on the screen now is the actual Sanskrit verse from the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which Srila Prabhupada has translated in there, like Prabhupada says, in the Brahma Vaivarta Purana. So in the Nectar of Devotion, he says, Hari Vasara Samano Yata Brahma Vaivarte Sarva Papa Prashamanam Manam Punya Atyatikam Tata Atyantika Tata Govinda Smaranam Nenam Ekadasham Upo Sanam. Respecting the day of the Lord from Brahma Vaivarta Purana. By fasting on Ekadasi, a person destroys all sins, gains abundant pious credits, and attains remembrance of the Lord. So Hari, the word used here is Hari Varsara, meaning the day of Hari. Normally in a month we have 30 days, or 31 sometimes, or 28. But average 30 days. So on the different days, most people, they are accustomed to, in those days, focusing on ahara, eating, nidram, sleeping, maitum, mating, maybe not so much mating, and bhayam, defending. That is the focus for the living entities. Those four: ahara, nidram, maitum, and bhayam. And then we have different days. We have Ravivar, Somvar, Shukravar. So many days that people dedicate to other living, other demigods. Like some people, Monday is Lord Shiva, Thursday is for Lord Hanuman, or sometimes Tuesday, Lord Hanuman, Thursdays is for Durga. So many days they dedicate to other living, other demigods. But there's 2 days in the month. It's called Hari Vasara. These are days of Lord Hari. And it is said on those days, the people, they dedicate it to Lord Hari. Dedicating to Lord Hari means, yeah, fasting is there, but the real focusing is on hearing and chanting the glories of the Lord. In India now, on certain days, some shopkeepers, they would close. Those who are devotees of Lord Shiva. On certain days, they would close the shop. When those are devotees of Lord Durga, on certain days, they close the shop. You see the Muslims on a Friday, between certain time, namaz, they close the shop. So in the olden days, when the focus was always on Lord Hari, people would stop all activities on Ekadasi. Those who had businesses, they would close their businesses. Everything would be simply focused on Lord Hari on Ekadasi. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, there's one section in the Adi Lila where Sachi Mata tells Lord Chaitanya, whatever you want, I'll give to you. And Lord Chaitanya tells his mother Sachi, the only thing I want is that you may observe Ekadasi. The strict sadhakas on Ekadasi, they don't eat at all. It's nirjal, no eating, no drinking. Simply focused on chanting. And it is said on those days where the Vaishnavas or the devotees dedicate to Ekadasi, then Lord Hari immediately comes and resides in their heart. And if they practice Ekadasi really nice, Lord Hari will remain in their heart at least till the next Ekadasi. And then the next Ekadasi comes, they dedicate it, they do all of the activities to please the Lord. The Lord becomes so pleased, He resides in their heart. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, I was reading again the other day. He said, Vaishnavas also use these days of Ekadasis for self-reflection. And it's very, very good for self-reflection, because when you dedicate on Ekadasis, especially for increasing your hearing and chanting, it really improves one's sadhana. I used to be an avid reader. I should read a lot. But I don't know, recently, because of services, so many other things, my reading has somewhat decreased. And I started recently to pay a bit more attention to reading. And it gave me such a boost. Such a boost. I was thinking, what have I been missing? It's so relishable to read, to dedicate some time. And generally, I try to do it, before I go to bed. And it's so nice to go in a nice consciousness to sleep, and you wake up in good consciousness. So these days of Ekadasi, they are wonderful opportunities to minimize our eating and other activities. And it is said, yet Govinda Smaranam Nenam. It says here, the final result is we attain remembrance of the Lord. The goal of Krishna consciousness is Krishna Smaranam or Govinda Smaranam. To remember Krishna at every moment. At every moment. And this Ekadasi is one of the mothers of devotion. So very important, especially for Vaishnavas. I mean, normally in Ekadasi, we read these pastimes of all the different types of material benefits that have come to people who have observed Ekadasi. But the real benefit is the Govinda Smaranam, remembering the Lord. And this is one of the first 10 positive injunctions Srila Rupa Goswami has given. Anyone's got any comments on that? On this? Or questions? Reflections?
Hare Krishna, it's Komal Mataji. Prabhu, I just wanted to ask a question. I think, this day and age, often we're working on Ekadashi.
Yes.
So how would you say that we can maybe balance and still, because we do our sadhana and our chanting, but how can we be more, focused on Krishna even on those days?
Yeah, it's working, it occupies a good 8 hours from the day. But we can see there is, besides work, even then work, generally on Ekadasi, if one does good sadhana in the morning, at least, the really strict sadhakas, they stay up the whole night on Ekadasi, the whole day, all night. But if we're working, we'll feel so tired if we were to do that. But what we can do is at least get up a little earlier, get up during the Brahma Muhurta hour during that time. And Prabhupada said, if one chants 16 rounds in the morning, then his opportunity to remember Krishna during the day is so much enhanced. So much enhanced. So one thing we can do if we don't get up early, at least on Ekadasi, we get up early, chant as many rounds as we can. And again, we'll discuss it a bit more in the work, sometimes out of obligation, we engage in some Gramya Katha, we can do, but we have choices. On Ekadasi, we can try to be more alone. More alone, which will give us time to focus on Krishna.
Yeah, thanks, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Okay. If there's no other comment, we'll go to the next one. And we'll just, let's read from Srila Prabhupada what he says about number 10. Worshipping sacred trees like the banyan tree. Prabhupada writes in the Nectar of Devotion. Okay, if someone's got the Nectar of Devotion open, it's not very much. Would you like to read?
Krishna, I can read, Prabhuji.
Yes, read, please, Jayashri Mataji.
Offering respect to the banyan trees. In the Skanda Purana, it is directed that a devotee should offer water to the Tulsi plant and the Amalaka trees. He should offer respect to the cows and to the Brahmanas, and should serve the Vaishnavas by offering them respectful obeisances and meditating upon them. All of these processes will help the devotee to diminish the reactions to his past sinful activities.
Thank you. So let's go to the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So there it's written, Datri Ashvatadi Gauravam Yata Skande. Ashvata Tulasi Datri Go Bhumisura Vaishnavaha Pujitaha Pranataha Dyaitaha Shapayayanti Nenam Agam. So respecting the Amalaki, Ashvata, and other things. So it's written the other things, but we can see what's the other things here. Go Bhumishura Vaishnava from Skanda Purana. So here Srila Rupa Goswami says, I will now give you a quotation from the Skanda Purana, which supports this particular principle of sadhana bhakti. And in the Skanda Purana, it is said, where have I gone? I jumped about. Oh, what happened? Sorry, I had it on the slide. I seem to have got my order mixed up. Just bear with me. Oh, okay, I lost it. Just bear with me. I will share my screen. This is my Nectar of Devotion. Okay, so you will see right at the top here, the top of this page. Human beings destroy sin by worshipping, respecting, and contemplating the Ashvata tree, the Tulasi tree, Amalaki tree, the cow, the Brahmanas, and the Vaishnavas. So the Ashvata tree is the banyan tree. Tulsi tree, we know Tulsi. Amalaki, also known as Indian gooseberry, Amla tree. The cow, the Brahmanas, and the Vaishnavas. So the other things mentioned besides the banyan tree is Tulsi tree, Amalaki tree, the cow, the Brahmanas, and the Vaishnavas. So Jisila Jiva Goswami gives some commentary on this, which I will read. Okay, let's start. Okay. The Ashvata tree is worthy of worship. Why is it worthy of worship? Because it is a vibhuti of the Lord explained in the Gita. We know when the Lord explains his different opulences in the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says, of the trees, I am the banyan tree. So it's one of the opulences of the Lord. The other one is Bhumisura. Deva on earth means a Brahmana. A Brahmana is sometimes called Bhumisura, meaning a demigod on earth. It means Brahmana. Because the Lord has descended on earth as the benefactor and friend of the cows and the Brahmanas, they should be worshipped by the devotees. So we have this prayer every day we sing, Namo Brahmanya Go, Namo Go Brahmana Itaya Cha, Jagat Itaya Krishnaya Govindaya Namo Namaha. That Krishna, he is the benefactor and the friend of the cows and Brahmins. So that's the reason why we respect and worship the cows and the Brahmanas. All those other things are mentioned along with Tulsi and the Vaishnava to remove doubt about worshipping them. Among the other items, worship of the cow bestows the ultimate goal for the worshippers of Krishna. And here Srila Jiva Goswami quotes a verse from the Gautamiya Tantra. And there's a very, very nice verse where it says, Gavam Kundayanam Kuryad Go Grasham Go Pradakshinam Gosha Nityam Prasanasu Gopalo Api Prasidhati. One should tickle the cows, feed them, and circumambulate them. Gopal is pleased when the cows are always pleased. So it's nice here. It says you should tickle them, feed them, and circumambulate them. So we're fortunate that we have Shishirada Gokulananda's cows near us, and we can take some instruction from Srila Jiva Goswami's commentary, and we should tickle them, feed them, and circumambulate. And for a devotee, everything a devotee does, the devotee does for the pleasure of Krishna. And in this verse, it's clearly said, when the cows are pleased, Krishna becomes pleased. And the converse is also true. When the cows are persecuted, when the cows are ill-treated, then Krishna is not at all pleased. So this is a principle of bhakti, something we should not be shy about wanting to follow. Are there any comments or questions anyone has about this? About the cows?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
So when it comes to the treating of the cows, it's always a conflict about what we should do if we can't get ahimsa milk and ahimsa products, because we can't at the moment. It's not possible. There's a big waiting list. So we try and have organic milk, but it's still not really good enough, is it?
If we were completely honest, it is not good enough, no. Yeah. Once Prabhupada was asked, they were just buying sort of, flour and milk and other products. He said that when Krishna is fed milk from his own cows, vegetable or sabji that is grown by his devotees, he enjoys that 200 times more than he would ordinarily enjoy. So it certainly gives Krishna more pleasure when we offer him, milk from his own cows and produce grown by his devotees. But that is not to say that, we condemn ourselves to a very difficult situation. Krishna is very kind. He understands, what we are. And Prabhupada said, in this material world, everything is tainted. Practically everything is tainted. And Prabhupada encouraged the devotees to start, farming communities and so on. So that could be minimized. But Prabhupada never made a big deal of having to drink milk or to offer. In one sense, Prabhupada said they will get the benefits. The cows, they will get the benefit. So yeah, that's how we see it. Yeah, it's not good not easy to get the ahimsa milk. Okay, any other questions, comments on that? Or shall we move on? So that completes the first 10 positive injunctions, dear devotees. That's the pramans, the evidence, as Prabhupada titles the chapter, evidence regarding devotional principles. And we know that the next 10 are the negative prohibitions. So we shall go through that now. So Kishore Prabhu, you can You can read in the first instance the 10 negative prohibitions, and then we'll go through them each one.
Okay, Prabhu.
You can see my screen?
Yes, I can. Yeah. So the next set of instruction is listed as follows. First, one should rigidly give up the company of non-devotees. Second, one should not instruct a person who is not desirous of accepting devotional service. Third one is one should not be very enthusiastic about constructing costly temples or monasteries. Fourth one is one should not try to read too many books, nor should one develop the idea of earning his livelihood by lecturing on or professionally reciting Srimad Bhagavatam or Bhagavad Gita. Fifth one is one should not be neglectful in ordinary dealings. Sixth one is one should not be under the spell of lamentation in loss or jubilation in gain. Seventh one is one should not disrespect the demigods. Eighth is one should not give unnecessary trouble to any living entity. Ninth one is one should not carefully avoid the various offenses in chanting the holy name of the Lord or in worshipping the deity in the temple. 10th one is one should be very intolerant toward the blasphemy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna or his devotees.
Thank you. So the first item there is one should rigidly give up the company of non-devotees. And Prabhupada, let's read what Prabhupada writes about that. Where is this? It's quite a long purport. So maybe, let me see what we can ask to read. Komal, Mataji, you can read the first two paragraphs, please.
Sure. Lord Chaitanya was once asked by one of his householder devotees that the general behavior of a Vaishnava should be. In this connection, Lord Chaitanya replied that a Vaishnava should always give up the company of non-devotees. Then he explained that there are two kinds of non-devotees. One class is against the supremacy of Krishna, and another class is too materialistic. In other words, those who are after material enjoyment and those who are against the supremacy of the Lord are called a Vaishnava, and their company should be strictly avoided.
Yeah, carry on.
In the Katyayana Samhita, it is stated that even if one is forced to live within a cage of iron or in the midst of a blazing fire, he should accept this position rather than live with non-devotees who are through and through against the supremacy of the Lord. Similarly, in the Vishnu Rahasya, there is a statement to the effect that one should prefer to embrace a snake, a tiger, or an alligator, rather than associate with persons who are worshippers of various demigods and who are impelled by material desire.
Thank you. And we can ask Mayank Prabhu, you can read the next two paragraphs.
Sure, Prabhuji. In the scriptures, it is instructed that one may worship a certain demigod if he is desirous of achieving some material gain. For example, one is advised to worship the sun god if he is desirous of getting rid of a diseased condition. For a beautiful wife, one may worship Uma, the wife of Lord Shiva, and for advanced education, one may worship Saraswati. Similarly, there is a list in the Srimad Bhagavatam for worshippers of all demigods according to different material desires. But all of these worshippers, although they appear to be very good devotees of the demigods, are still considered to be non-devotees. They cannot be accepted as devotees. The Mayavadis impersonalists say that one may worship any form of the Lord, and that doesn't matter because one reaches the same destination anyway. But it is clearly stated in the Bhagavad Gita that those who are worshippers of the demigod will ultimately reach only the planets of those demigods, while those who are devotees of Lord himself will be promoted to the Lord's abode, the kingdom of God. So actually, these persons who are worshippers of demigod have been condemned in the Gita It is described that due to their lusty desires, they have lost their intelligence and have therefore taken to worshipping the different demigods. So in the Vishnu Rahasya, these demigod worshippers are forcefully condemned by the statement that it is better to live with the most dangerous animal than to associate with these persons.
Yes. Thank you. So going into the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, we can say Sri Krishna Vimukha Janasanga Tyaga. You would have recognized this word Janasanga when we studied the Nectar of Devotion. I think it was third verse. Janasanga cha lolyam salolyam cha. So Yata Katyayana Samitayam. So this is described, this particular one, in the Katyayana Samhita. The Samhitas form part of the 4 core Vedas. So there is some verses written. So this is not, some Vaishnava Acharya making some, some difficult statements. This is from the Shastra. It is preferable to remain within a cage of blazing fire than to have the misfortune of living in association with persons who are opposed to thinking of the Lord. And then a similar statement is there in the Vishnu Rahasya. And there he said, I consider it preferable to embrace a snake, a tiger, or a crocodile than to associate with those who worship devatas. They are bearers of spears, piercing me with their deviant desires. So here we see two quite striking verses. It's like no question of one ever thinking of embracing a snake, because the only result you get is one will be poisoned. A tiger, one will be eaten. A crocodile, one will be devoured. There's no question. So one may ask, why is it so extreme? These people, the worshippers of the demigods, they are religious people. They are not atheists. They are pious people that, are diligent in worshipping the demigods. What harm can there be? Why is this considered so extreme? And then we will read, in a few verses from now, not to disrespect the demigods. So why is these statements being made? Relatively speaking, they're not picking so much on the atheists. Although Prabhupada especially certainly talks about the Mayavadis, Mayavadi Aparadi. But why the demigod worshippers? Would anyone like to offer some of their own reflections, maybe, why this could be so?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna,
Is it because the people who worship demigods are usually asking for some material benefit or some material benediction, which keeps them, tied to materialistic activities rather than spiritual advancement?
Yes, exactly. If you recall, one of the first things we studied in the Nectar of Devotion is the definition of what is pure devotional service. And some of you may remember the verse. Who would like to repeat the verse? The definition of pure devotional service. Anya bilashita shunyam. Shunyam means make zero. Anya bilashita shunyam. Jnana karmadi anavrita. Anakulyena Krishna anushilanam bhakti uttama. Uttama bhakti. We have to make zero Jnana karmadi anavrita. Any desire for liberation or impersonal liberation or fruit of activity. Now, we know we tend to take on the qualities of the people we associate with. And as you have just stated, Jayashri Mataji, generally the demigod worshippers, generally they worship the demigods because they want something in return. What they want in return? Generally, it's something material, nothing spiritual. And if we look at, like through the Srimad Bhagavatam, like some people may ask, can one not have pure bhakti for Lord Shiva? Can Uttama bhakti for Lord Shiva not exist? And Prabhupada once said, generally no. Generally no, because one is always seeking something in return. It is that, when one has devotion for Lord Krishna, then one's heart becomes full. It becomes full because Lord Krishna says he resides in the heart of his devotees. And if one is not a devotee of Lord Krishna, there is always some void. And some void meaning it will have to be filled with some material desire. So the demigod worshippers in general, they have some material desires. And if we worship or we associate with those who have material desires, some of that will rub off on us. If you embrace a snake is a snake. It just acts according to instinct. If you embrace a tiger is a tiger. It does not have particular material desires to accumulate wealth. And as Prabhupada says here, they worship Uma for some beautiful wife. It's a tiger. And same with a crocodile. They simply are animals acting according to instinct. And if one was to associate with them, you won't get material desires. No extraneous material desires is likely to rub off on one. But associate with a person who has materialistic desires. Associating means you will have to talk with them. You will have to eat the food that they cook. And indulge in some of the activities that they indulge in. And when you talk, like when the Vaishnavas, when the devotees of Lord Hari get together, they simply talk about the pastimes of the Lord. They relish, and it is so pleasurable. But for one who is not a devotee of Krishna, when one talks about Lord Krishna, there's not much interest. That discussion cannot go further. There's no rasa. There's nothing to really stimulate one's bhakti in that association. They may want to talk about some demigod. So it's not beneficial. It's not beneficial to worship, to intimately associate with the demigod worshippers. If they have some interest in hearing about Krishna, well, that's fine. That's all right. Does that make sense? Or anyone got any questions or comments on that point? Everyone is good. All right. So let us move on to the next item there, which is not accepting unfit disciples, constructing many temples, or reading many books. So Prabhupada has a lot to write about here. In the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, there's only 2 verses in connection with this. No, sorry, 2 verses quoted from the 7th canto. 7th canto. So maybe we can read. Prabhupada explains. Let's read the purport. How are we doing for time? Let me see. Okay, we've got 5 minutes. At least we can read what Prabhupada says, and then we can discuss from the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So who hasn't? Oh, we'll go back to Kishore. Prabhu, have you read?
Prabhuji, he's not here today.
Oh,
sorry.
he's not there. Okay,
Yeah.
he's not there. Okay, so Kishore, Prabhu, you read the first 2 paragraphs, please.
Okay.
Have you got the book with you, or do I need to put it up on the screen?
No, I have it here.
Okay.
Yeah. Another structure is that another stricture is that a person may have many disciples, but he should not act in such a way that he will be obliged to any of them for some particular action or some favor. And one should also not be very enthusiastic about constructing new temples, nor should one be enthusiastic about reading various types of books, save and except the ones that lead to the advancement of devotional service. Practically, if one very carefully reads Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, teachings of Lord Chaitanya in this Nectar of Devotion, that will give him sufficient knowledge to understand the science of Krishna consciousness. One need not take the trouble of reading other books. In the 7th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, 13th chapter, verse 8, Narada Muni, while discussing with Maharaj Yudhishthir the various functions of the different orders in society, especially mentions rules for the sannyasis, those persons who have renounced this material world. One who has accepted the sannyasa order of life is forbidden to accept as a disciple anyone who is not fit. A sannyasi should first of all examine whether a prospective student is sincerely seeking Krishna consciousness. If he is not, he should not be accepted. However, Lord Chaitanya's causeless mercy is such that he advised all bona fide spiritual masters to speak about Krishna consciousness everywhere. Therefore, in the line of Lord Chaitanya, even the sannyasis can speak about Krishna consciousness everywhere, and if someone is seriously inclined to become a disciple, the sannyasis always accept him.
Thank you. So I'll just comment on this first 2 paragraphs. The first one, Prabhupada talks about the accepting of disciples. One may think, oh, that doesn't really apply to me. I am, I'm not accepting disciples. But it's a very important principle here, disciples and followers, or even not being very enthusiastic to construct new temples. And Prabhupada talks about books. So he talks about disciples, temples, and books in the first paragraph. Probably the one most applicable to most of us is the one about reading too many books. So Prabhupada clarifies what he means by that. One may interpret it that is almost a statement about discouraging reading too much. No, not at all. Not at all. Srila Prabhupada actually said one should read a minimum of 2 hours every day. But Prabhupada is saying, yes, specifically one should read Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, teachings of Lord Chaitanya or Chaitanya Charitamrita, and Nectar of Devotion. And Prabhupada says this will give them sufficient knowledge to understand the science of Krishna consciousness. There's a tendency among many ISKCON devotees. Nowadays, there are so many books that are available. The acharyas, the 6 Goswamis, the predecessor acharyas, Vishnava Chakravarti Thakur, Narottam Das Thakur, Bhakti Vinod Thakur. They were prolific writers. They wrote many, many books. But Prabhupada is saying the first duty is for us to read Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, teachings of Lord Chaitanya, Chaitanya Charitamrita, and this Nectar of Devotion. And Prabhupada uses the word Prabhupada says this will be sufficient knowledge to understand the science of Krishna consciousness. Now, the beauty of Srila Prabhupada's presentation of literatures, the literatures he has particularly translated and which he mentions here. Prabhupada understood the mentality of the modern society very well. Prabhupada, more than any previous acharyas, he traveled to the Western world, and he said he carefully studied the mentality, and he wrote his purports, and he's given his translations very much in line with that mentality. His Prabhupada has just given us, just like if you go to a doctor, there is a medicine, and the doctor prescribes just the right dosage. And he said, for you, you take that tablet, maybe you take them so many milligrams a day. If you take too less, you will still be caught up in the disease. If you take too much of the dosage, it can have negative consequences. So you got to have just the right dosage. And this is what Srila Prabhupada has given us. He's packaged the Vedic teachings in just the perfect dosage for us. Just the perfect dosage for us. And if we read how Srila Prabhupada has presented these books, and we make it our goal to want to read at least before I die, and that can come anytime. I must read the Bhagavad Gita. I must read the whole Nectar of Devotion. I must read all of the Srimad Bhagavatam. I must read the entire Chaitanya Charitamrita. That should be our goal. And Prabhupada says we won't be, by doing that, be caught up in reading too many books. So it's after 7. We'll continue with this particular item because it's relevant. But before we close, any comments, questions, or reflections by anyone?
Just with the books, Prabhuji, we've got so many books. Every time we go to the manor, we'll buy another book.
Yeah.
And I suppose this is, at least this focuses the mind that, we just collect them on the shelves. We don't get time to read them. So if we just concentrate on the ones that we've talked about today,
Yes,
and control ourselves when another enticing book appears, maybe
it's
that's
not necessarily bad. I mean, many of us, what we do, we read. I particularly like reading about Prabhupada Lilamrita and his pastimes and so on. That really gives me a better insight into Prabhupada, the person who's writing. Because sometimes if you read Prabhupada's words, you may think Prabhupada is so heavy, but if you know the person behind the words,
yes,
writes is almost like he's speaking to you, and a dear friend is speaking to you. So it's not like necessary. All of Prabhupada has written this like this. It's not bad to read other books, but this should be our main reading, our main focus. Should be our main focus, and we can read other books, and it'll help us. Not necessarily we shouldn't do that.
Sometimes the other books comment on Bhagavad Gita or Srimad Bhagavatam, and that helps me understand.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Sutapa Prabhu's book,
Yes.
the book Bhagavat. That's really nice. It helps us read, and there's so many. Yeah, not necessarily bad. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Any other comments or reflections?
Okay, it's not that important, but what I understand, basically not understand, but what I found out today, that even this amla tree is considered as worshipable, because I never thought or considered when I was in Mumbai, we only had tulsi and banyan tree. Like they are worshipable and you take care of that. But amla tree, I never even heard of it. So Yeah, it's interesting concept.
Yes, very interesting. And Krishna is pleased when we do that. Okay, dear devotees, we'll stop here. Thank you for your association. Thank you for coming and your participation. We'll finish off with Vaishnava pranams. Let us offer our respectful obeisances unto all the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord, who are just like desire trees and can fulfill the desires of everyone, for their full of compassion for the fallen conditioned souls. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripasindubhya patitanam bhavanebhyo Anantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. And just the last parting comment from me. We are now in the book marathon. I was hoping to get to a verse today, after the 8, 10. Prabhupada beautifully explains about the need for us to give Krishna consciousness to others. So I would urge all of the devotees, even you do a little bit. This year is the 125th anniversary of Srila Prabhupada. We want to reach out to 125,000 people. And we're asking each devotee, follower of Srila Prabhupada, can you try just to approach 125 people during this marathon, either by email, WhatsApp, personally, whatever you want. Just approach 125 people saying, this book Prabhupada has given us is full of Vedic wisdom that can bestow the greatest benefit on us. Please, you take a book, or if you don't, sponsor a book which can be given to someone else. So please, dear devotees, try to, during this month, reach out and become involved. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Hare
Thank you,
Krishna.
Hare Krishna.